Welcome to All Grown Up Now, a tale of retail, relocation, revenge, reinvention, reckless behavior, really good clothes, indiscretion, infidelity, domestic violence, and one kidnapping. I'm Kenneth D. King, podcasting from my studio near Union Square in New York City. This podcast is another in a series of installments from a novel I wrote called All Grown Up Now, A Friendship in 3 Acts, available on Amazon.com. It's the story of a small-town boy who dreams of being a grown-up and his journey to get there. Each week, you'll hear another installment of this story. I am pleased to announce that BearWorldMagazine.com will be one of the sponsors of all of the episodes going forward. In the last episode, we heard how Miss Ann was bilked out of the college money. Episode 21, The Divorce of the Decade, Part 1. The Ballad of Miss Ann. The place, San Francisco. Time, late 1990. During my time in therapy, when Dennis and I were looking at my desire to fix people in situations, I got a call from Mark. It was about noon. Shelley, my assistant, was there working. She was the one who answered the call and handed it off to me. "What's up?" I asked, rolling my eyes at Shelley, knowing where the conversation would lead and wanting to get it over with already. It was going to be yet another version of what Victor did to me. "Victor dented the refrigerator with my head," Mark blurted out. "What?" That definitely got my attention. "What happened?" I asked. The story spooled out. They had had another one of their arguments, and Mark threatened to leave Victor. Victor told Mark that if he left, Vic would kill himself. Not a bad idea, I thought. Too bad he didn't do it. It would have saved a lot of trouble. My bad. At that point, Mark threw Vic's anti-anxiety pills on the floor and poured a pitcher of water over them, turning them into a chemical sludge. Now, this is not strategically a good idea. If you have to tranquilize someone to keep them around, it's not a good idea to destroy the pills. Uh-oh. At that point, Vic threw Mark against the fridge, and now there's a dented refrigerator and a dented head. Great. That's when I let Mark know exactly how I felt about domestic violence. Once that line is crossed, there's no going back. I reminded him of my past with Miss Ann and the domestic violence, but he conveniently didn't remember me ever saying anything. "Well, Mark," I said, "since you don't remember, I'm going to tell you the entire story just so you're clear about what I think of all of this." So, I decided to give him the long version of the Ballad of Miss Ann, which you, dear listeners, will also hear. Now, I've dropped bits and pieces of Miss Ann's story in the previous episodes, but since this period of my life more than any other marked me permanently, you all get to hear now, and in the next episode, the long version of The Divorce of the Decade. Miss Ann was left well fixed, as they would say, after Dad died. There were a number of insurance policies that surfaced, only a few of which she knew about. This meant that she wouldn't have to go to work, but could, as she said, stay at home to make our lives hell uninterrupted. This was usually said in a virtuous tone, with her hand held to her chest, like she was sacrificing something for the good of her offspring. Great. She gave up sewing and cooking, never did like doing either of them, she said, just so she could make us do them and complain about the results. For the first 4 or 5 months after Dad died, Mom had an extended ulcer attack and lived only on iced tea and cigarettes. As a result, she lost a considerable amount of weight and, I think, for the first time in her life, emerged as a beauty. And she really was. Now, every gay man thinks his mom is the most beautiful in the world, but Miss Ann really was. She was short and fine-framed, with her salt and pepper hair, warm brown eyes with full eyelashes, and a beautiful profile with a German nose. The weight loss revealed cheekbones as well. Miss Ann always had good clothes, which she generally made for herself. Her major expense was good shoes, and until the day she died, she had at least 50 pairs, all well kept, in boxes in her closets. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. The weight loss meant new clothes, and Miss Ann went sort of mod as a Kansas widow dared to in 1969, even going so far as to show her knees in church, in itself a new activity. After Dad died, she had gotten religion for a while, but it didn't stick. However, the church had enough time to put the hit on her to buy an expensive set of bells for the bell choir in her husband's memory. Then there were the wigs, which were in fashion just then. One real Ann Miller number in Superman blue black, one shag cut in salt and pepper, a nice ash blonde short flip in human hair, and she looked great in that, and the wiglet with the barrel curls, which was very Joan Crawford meeting the board of Pepsi. She also bought records, Booker T and the MGs, late Elvis. Now, make no mistake, life with her was still Dances with Landmines, but at least now it had cooler clothes and a better soundtrack. But all of that aside, Miss Ann was a widow woman in Salina, Kansas, with 3 kids and no prospects for a husband. Not a good position for a woman to be in 1969 in Salina, Kansas. Life danced through the minefields of my early adolescence when one night in March of 1971, the phone call came that would change everything. The call came late at night, so we kids heard about it the next morning at breakfast. Miss Ann was all dreamy and told us that an old boyfriend from years ago had finally found her. It seems he was stationed at the Air Force in Salina in the early 50s, and that's how they got to know each other. This guy tricked a telephone operator into getting Grandma to tell him Mom's married name earlier that evening. It never occurred to me at the time to ask why he had to do that. Why didn't he just call her and ask for it? His name was Don White, and he lived in Oklahoma City. They had talked for hours, she told us, and it seemed like old times. And could he come up to see her next weekend? She said yes, of course. She just knew we would all like each other, which was her way of saying, "God damn, you kids better make nice or else." We kids never ever knew what "or else" meant, but we knew it wasn't pleasant. Oh my God. When the family heard, they were apoplectic. This I didn't understand. I was thinking, good, this'll get her out of our hair for a while. It never occurred to me that something was afoot if Grandma had to be tricked into telling Mom's married name. But I was 13 and thinking of more immediate concerns like, will he take her out for a long dinner so we can have some relief? Maybe we would get to watch Dark Shadows and Johnny Carson and The Late Show for a change before she came back to bear down on us again. And will Grandma stay with us? Always more fun and better cooking. Or will we get Aunt Helen? Grandma, Aunt Helen, even Uncle Bob all weighed in on the serious mistake Miss Ann was making, which only made her more determined to see it through. "Nobody wants me to be happy," she shrieked. "Nobody cares about me." So Don White was invited to come visit the next weekend, just out of spite. Now, let me introduce you to Don White. His full name was J. Donald White, but the initial J was just that. No name was attached. Creepy is the adjective that still comes to mind when I think back to him on that first meeting. He was short with bad posture, with small, closely spaced, rather beady eyes, and a bit too much wavy salt and pepper hair done a la Bobby Sherman, with sideburns treading dangerously close to being late Elvis. Don also spoke with a mushy, oaky accent that automatically deducted 10 points from his IQ. I also recall a gray and black houndstooth bulletproof polyester suit, the type with the fake belt in the back, complete with an enormously wide tie that you could land an airplane on, and a pair of very ugly brown alligator shoes. To complete the package, he drove a white Porsche 912. Now, he seemed very uncomfortable meeting us kids, and as some people who don't like kids do, he tried way too hard to make a good impression. It had the opposite effect. Just so there was no hint of impropriety, Don got a motel room. Now, that changed as the weeks went on, and he visited more frequently. Once or twice, Mom went to visit him in Oklahoma City, and we were thinking, freedom, Grandma gets to stay and cook. And when they were apart, they talked nightly on the phone. Now, this was in the days of toll calls, so I imagine those bills ran to the hundreds of dollars. We kids were subjected to the daily play-by-play of the sweet things he said to her during those phone calls, and how she yearned to be with him, and how he loved her dearly, and how her family had got him all wrong. One weekend, I was sent to Oklahoma City with Don to do the male bonding thing. Now, we didn't call it that in Kansas in 1971. I don't believe there was a name for it. But I was subjected to it regularly, this male bonding thing, being a sissy kid of a widow with 2 daughters, and it was believed that prolonged exposure to older males, be they uncles, dad's old business partners, or neighbor men, and all they represented, body odor, beer swilling, crotch scratching, sports, and being free from the sissifying presence of too many women would serve as a proper education in how I was to behave. The only thing it really did, though, was to give me a taste for a certain kind of man in my adolescent and adult fantasies. Now, when I got to Oklahoma City, oh my God, what I found. Don lived in an apartment in a motel he owned, the Sands Motor Hotel on Route 66. It did exist, and just as proof, there is an image of the postcard on the internet. Look it up. Sands Motor Hotel, Oklahoma City, Route 66. You'll find it. This motor hotel is what you would expect in Oklahoma City. The buildings were painted flamingo pink with turquoise trim, and palm trees were planted around the mermaid-shaped swimming pool, and I'm not kidding. This pool had one black tile at the edge for the eyelash, red tiles at the edge for the lips, and one pink tile for her nipple. Now, Tom thought that was really clever. The photo of this pool featured prominently, but upside down, on that postcard. Again, look it up. Sands Motor Hotel, Route 66, Oklahoma City. Don's apartment was decorated in early 70s bachelor pad with red shag carpet on the floor and the walls, which gave me vertigo. It had black vinyl upholstered furniture and wrought iron Mediterranean-style occasional tables and a matching swag lamp with a red crackle glass shade. The most notable feature, though, in Don's apartment was the swarm of cockroaches. I had never seen a cockroach before, really. Mom was one of those white glove clean gals who put us through spring cleaning every weekend, and to be confronted with swarms of cockroaches was really off-putting, to say the least. Being a real sissy where insects are concerned, then as now, I couldn't sit, let alone sleep, in that apartment the entire time I was there. It's hard to sleep standing up and not touching anything. The generations of dead cockroaches lining the drawers and cabinets in the kitchen were an astonishing sight. For amusement, I imagined this to be the mausoleum to the House of Cockroach, where I suppose the families of cockroaches celebrated Memorial Day by setting up plastic wreaths and bringing picnic lunches of food scavenged from Don's bed. Yes, there were cockroaches and bits of food in his bed as well, while remembering their ancestors. Now, Miss Ann had seen this apartment, so after seeing this, it made me wonder what it was that she found attractive about him. Now, Don also ran around the apartment wearing really thin white cotton boxer shorts, black socks, and nothing else. He was fairly well put together for someone so creepy and so blue-white. The shadow of the dark pubic hair showing through the thin cotton of his boxer shorts was something I found strangely appealing, but also disturbing. I believe it was in May of 1971 when Don brought the rock of an engagement ring to Kansas. It looked like he took a headlight out of the car. "Hey, if you can get a glove over it, it's too small," Miss Ann said one day when showing it to her friend Vivian. "If you have to look for it or feel for it, then it's not big enough," Vivian shot back and roared with laughter. I didn't get the joke. Now, I must take a little detour here to introduce you to Vivian. She was Mom's best friend from high school and a real original, and I adored her. In 1969, Mom reconnected with Vivian, one of her high school friends. It was their 20th class reunion, and Vivian had moved back to town while her husband Brad was stationed in Alaska, of all places. Vivian had a round face, short red hair, blue-white skin, and freckles all over her body, or as much body as I could see anyway. She also had a fondness for leopard print chiffon scarves, cool sunglasses, and big, thick stogies. Vivian had 2 cars, one of which was a 1966 Pontiac GTO, which she used to drag race on weekends. It was white with a red interior, bucket seats, mag wheels, thrush pipes, and a Hurst shifter, oh baby. And it had a suicide knob on the steering wheel, so she wouldn't have to put the stogie down when she drove. We could hear her coming 2 blocks away, and she would always screech up into the drive, honking and yelling, "Hey, Annie, let's go!" Vivian was my Auntie Mame before I saw the movie. She taught me how to mix a scotch and water. "Lots of ice as the scotch eats it up, honey," she would say. And it was from her I learned about things like how to keep a tarleton with a long ash stuck to your lip while still smoking it. That long ash would drive Miss Ann crazy. She was always following Vivian around with an ashtray. One day I asked her how she kept it on her lip. "Cheap lipstick," Vivian said conspiratorially. "High wax content." Her preferred color was mercurochrome orange with matching nail polish. Vivian also encouraged my creative impulses. At the time, I was working on what I called my house. It was a dollhouse, actually, made of cardboard boxes, and I made all the furniture. So gay. Looking back, I did a really good job. We're talking channel-tufted upholstery on a very small scale. Vivian would always look in on the current decorating project because I was always redecorating, what a surprise, and she would comment favorably. I also learned about origami through Vivian. One day, she brought me 2 how-to paperback books on origami and a stack of beautiful colored paper to practice with, and it wasn't even my birthday. Miss Ann was none too pleased. She didn't want this side of my personality encouraged, as I couldn't make any money that way, and I was already a sissy. As Mom was holding forth with those opinions, Vivian, who had her back to Mom and was facing me, just looked at me, smiled, and rolled her eyes. Vivian also told me about the things she and Mom did when they were teenagers, like stealing toilets to plant in the Catholic Church garden with the statue of the Virgin emerging from the porcelain, or wrecking cars while ogling the boys. But you'd never know it by us. Even though she was experimenting with mod, Miss Ann had Nancy Reagan taste and behavior even before that term was coined. When Vivian would get going after a couple of my very strong scotch and waters, Miss Ann would get that thin, tight-lipped smile that usually meant, "Shut the fuck up." It was fun to ask a few pointed questions of Vivian at these times, because it usually resulted in one of those rare occasions when Mom would tell us that we could ride our bicycles to the store just to stop the situation before it got out of hand. As you can tell, Vivian was our source of surprise and adventure, and I looked forward to her every visit. I remember the night I saw my first sports car. It was a balmy summer evening after dinner. In Kansas, there is no such thing as dinner after 7 p.m., and never as late as 10 p.m., as decent people are in bed by then. And we heard a small beep-beep out front. We all ran to the door and looked out to see Vivian sitting behind the wheel of a shiny, black 1958 MGA convertible with the top down, of course, with chrome wire wheels and red leather interior. Her sunglasses and leopard print chiffon scarf were in place, and she was puffing one of her ever-present stogies. So this was her other car, the one she kept under a tarp in the back of her driveway. "Hey, Annie, let's go for a ride," Vivian roared, waving her stogie. So Miss Ann, Kathy, and I piled into this 2-seater tin can and bounced around the dirt roads on the outskirts of town until way after sunset, dirt in our eyes and bugs in our teeth. Back to Mom, Don, and the engagement. They set the wedding date, June 7th, 1971, which was not even 3 months after the first phone call. As the days ran up to the wedding, Grandma, Aunt Helen, and all of the rest continued to be upset, apoplectic, and otherwise in a state. Still, they brought over what I now call temporary wedding gifts. You know, those items like the glass carafe with the candle underneath on the silver-plated stand from Target. These gifts say, I needed to get something but didn't want to invest too much because this marriage has a snowball's chance in hell. They really compared poorly to all the wedding gifts Mom got when she married Dad. Years later, when we were breaking up Mom's house after her funeral, these crappy wedding presents were the things nobody wanted. Temporary wedding gifts show up consistently at tag sales and thrift shops. The wedding was in the evening. I remember what Mom wore. It was a dusty, sky blue, stiff shantung dress, sleeveless with an empire waist and a big box pleat in the center front and a knee-length skirt. It was not a wedding dress, but a really nice one. Her hair was pulled up with the barrel curls and a cluster on the crown of her head, just like Joan Crawford. They were married at Trinity Methodist Church, where Dad's funeral was and where his bell choir resided. After we came home, while Mom, Don, and everyone else were in the family room for the reception, I locked myself in my room and had a good, long cry. At the time, I wasn't articulate enough to express what I was feeling. But looking back, I realized that they were tears of deep despair. I had a premonition that, even though life was difficult now, it was just going to get worse in a really dramatic way. Mom's friend Ruth, who was the maid of honor at my parents' wedding, and this one as well, came in and tried to comfort me. She tried to put a positive spin on the situation, but after a few minutes let her guard down and said doubtfully, "Well, this might work out." Great. I didn't understand why things were moving so fast or exactly why Mom was compelled to marry Don. I didn't know at the time that getting married in less than 3 months to someone you only saw on weekends might be unusual. But that aside, what I did understand was that we would be moving to a strange city where we wouldn't know anyone. Life would be turned upside down. During their honeymoon in Oklahoma City, Miss Ann and Don bought a house in Bethany, Oklahoma, one of the many suburbs of OKC. As it was told to me, this suburb was formed from land donated by a devout Nazarene, a good Christian who, in the city charter, forbade blacks to walk the streets, as it was told to me. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 overturned this, but that was only 7 years earlier, and Jim Crow was still very much alive in spirit. The sale of alcohol was still prohibited in Bethany, which was no problem because the Oklahoma City limits line and a liquor store was only 2 blocks away from the house. This was Mom's dream house. Miss Ann didn't know the term wet dream, or she would have been too freaked out about the sexual imagery to use it. It was a colonial style, 2 stories, red brick faced with white trim, 6 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms, a 2-car garage, and a large lot. "Of course you kids will like it," we were told. Of course we would. What were we going to do, live in a tent in the backyard? Which meant we needed to start packing up the house. Don said he would spring for a moving van for the good furniture, but we would have to load and haul everything else ourselves to save money. Terrific. Speaking of packing, Gwenda got the sack as well. When Mom started dating Dawn, she explained to Gwenda that she was still there for her. But as events accelerated, Gwenda started asking questions. Apparently, she'd seen this one before. Now, perhaps I should introduce you to Gwenda. One sign that Miss Ann was coming back to life after Dad died was her desire to get out of the house. Now, as she had no job and had slave labor in the form of 3 kids to do the housework every day, Miss Ann had time to spare. For a while, she took a Bible study course, but that eventually petered out, and she decided that volunteering was going to be more satisfying. She decided to be a big sister. Why? I'll never know, but there you are. For some reason, the Big Sisters gave her the most incorrigible girl they had, a 13-year-old named Gwenda. Gwenda was a miniature Janis Joplin, down to the frizzy hair, the purple crushed velvet hippie clothes, and the raspy whiskey and cigarettes voice. Her mother, a badly bleached blonde, was divorced and worked in a dive bar. She lived on Crawford Street with a man she wasn't married to and Gwenda's other siblings, who all had different last names. Gwenda was astonished that Kathy, Lori, and I all had the same last name. Apparently, Gwenda had a choice between reform school and Miss Ann. Now, no doubt there were days that she wished she had chosen reform school, especially the day in home ec when she took a pair of shears up the back of one of the other girls' sewing projects. Gwenda said it was because the girl was making fun of her and calling her names. This was the first time I heard the word slut, which was probably true, but I wouldn't know for sure. When Miss Ann got the call, because the school called her instead of Gwenda's real mom because she couldn't be located, Miss Ann descended on the school and Gwenda in a very Old Testament sort of way, bellowing in that voice of God way she could do when chewing out non-relatives. She verbally hammered poor Gwenda about what she had done and hammered the school officials about allowing the sort of harassment that led to this sort of thing. Something she'd never think of doing for me. Soon after this happened, Gwenda ran away and hooked up with a guy who bought her lots of new clothes. Mom went to find her and bring her back. I thought Gwenda looked so cool, as the clothes she got were very early 70s midi and maxi skirt outfits, complete with the lace-up, thigh-high platform boots and fur hats. Very Giorgio di San Angelo, my favorite being the black Persian lamb maxi coat. The clothes disappeared when it was discovered that Gwenda also got crabs along with all the cool new clothes. Now, we kids didn't know what that was, and it wasn't explained to us, but for a long time there was a can of Lysol spray in the bathroom that we were instructed, with much embarrassment, to spray the seat with after Gwenda would visit. For a while, Gwenda was like a cousin who visited us frequently and lived nearby. Mom spent lots of time with the juvenile authorities, steering her through the system such as it was in the time and place. Looking back, I find it interesting that she could spend all this time on Gwenda, listening to her and helping her sort out of her problems, but she wasn't doing it with us. When it looked like Don and Mom would get married, Gwenda started feeling insecure and causing some trouble. Miss Ann, of course, went into her "she's so selfish, she doesn't want me to be happy" routine. I don't know how Gwenda ended up. Events took a turn when Mom and Don got engaged, and Gwenda got tossed out when we started packing. Looking back, what Gwenda experienced was crueler than what we kids had to put up with. We at least had stability, or rather predictability, but Gwenda had none of that. Our family represented some sort of normalcy for her. Even though Gwenda was far from reformed, she came to believe that we would still be there for her. Our situation appeared less transient than what she was used to. Mom held out the potential of having some kind of security and cohesive family experience, only to snatch it back when it became inconvenient for her when she was marrying Dawn. I do remember our last time together. Miss Ann was introducing her to a new big sister and trying to put some positive spin on the situation. Gwenda sat silently, looking down at her lap, saying nothing, showing no emotion. The new big sister looked like no fun at all. She looked more like a matron in a women's prison film, what with her gray clothes and sensible shoes. She eyed Gwenda suspiciously the whole time, just waiting for the jailbreak. All in all, it went badly. Gwenda had been dumped for a man yet again, just like she had experienced with her mother. And, not too surprisingly, Miss Ann didn't or wouldn't see what she had done. Instead, Miss Ann pressed us kids into the task of packing up the house for the big move. In the next episode, we have Divorce of the Decade. Part 2. Subtitled, Whatever You Do, Don't Mess with Her Hair. Thanks for listening. I'd like to thank BearWorldMagazine.com for sponsoring this podcast. You can subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Spotify, and Google Play. If you have questions, you can reach me through the website allgrownupnow.com. You can follow me on Instagram at Kenneth D. King, on Facebook at Kenneth D. King Design, or on my main website, KennethDKing.com.